Welcome, everyone, to this panel discussion for the launch of Insights from Skills Strategies in the European Union. With me today are Natalia Miteva, the Deputy Minister of the Ministry of Education and Science of Bulgaria, Ilze Saleniece, the Deputy State Secretary and the Director of the Department for Policy Initiatives and Development from the Ministry of Education and Science of the Republic of Latvia, and Emma Kinsella, Head of Skills Policy and Enterprise Management from the Ministry of Further and Higher Education, Research, Innovation and Science of Ireland. Welcome, everyone. Let's start the questions. First, one of the report's key lessons is that a whole-of-government approach is vital for the development of a country's national skills strategy. Why is this important in the context of your country? I think I'd like to hear from each of you. So perhaps, Natalia, if we can start with you to get your views on this.
Absolutely. Well, as part of our skills strategy in Bulgaria, the OECD team carried out a mapping exercise of its existing strategic documents as well as implementation plans. And it turned out that 4 different ministries in Bulgaria had similar goals in strategic documents. And those were the Ministry of Labor and Social Policy, Education, Innovation, and respectively economy. So it was really critical for us to understand and leverage what was already going on, but also to build synergies across government in what's called a whole government approach and really create a vision together for skills in Bulgaria, taking into account the different challenges that this specific country is facing. For example, we are challenged demographically to an extreme. We have a shrinking working age population. Of course, we're affected economically by the digital transition. We're acing in some respects, but also being affected in other sectors. There's a green transition going on and so on. So specifically for Bulgaria, it was important to leverage what was going on and also to try to understand where the gaps were toward building a shared skill strategy for the country the way we saw it in this current moment and going into the future.
Thanks very much, Natalia. Ilse, the same question to you. Why is a whole-of-government approach vital for the development of Latvia's skills strategy?
Yeah, so firstly, I would like to highlight that skill strategy in Latvia, but also I think everywhere else, is a cross-sectoral policy document. So that's why it is important that all ministries, all various stakeholders are involved in both the negotiation process, the agreement process, as well as the implementation process. And in this way, by building this as cross-sectoral document, we can assure the policy coherence. Also, it is important, and also in our skill strategy case, we not only coordinated all different ministries involved in the development of the strategy, but also it was approved by the respective committee at the parliament and also cabinet of ministers. And this was important because of 2 reasons. So one reason was that it gave the weight of the agreement that all these stakeholders, key stakeholders at the government level, agreed on what they are planning to do in terms of skills policies. And secondly, it also provided us with systemic versus fragmented outlook on how we are working with skills. Thank you.
Thanks so much. So great perspectives from Bulgaria and Latvia already. Emma, I wonder if we can get your views on the picture from Ireland.
My apologies, I had some issue with my camera there. So yes, echoing, I suppose, what both Natalia and Ilse said, it's very important for Ireland to take a whole of government approach to our skills strategy. And in a specifically Irish context, that's really to do with our well-being as a country. So we're a very small, open economy. You know, skills are really important for us to thrive internationally and to give us that competitive advantage. And so it's really important that that message around skills is embedded across the government and across lots of different ministries. As Ilse said, many ministries with skin in the game, as it were, in relation to skills, the public employment services, our Ministry for Enterprise, and also for education, amongst others. And so the OECD have done some work with us in terms of reviewing our skills strategy. And one of the things that they picked up on was embedding that skills strategy approach across government. And we have been taking steps to do that and to strengthen that since the OECD have been with us and to make that more prominent. So picking up, I suppose, on what both previous contributors said, it's not just something that one ministry can do alone. The strategy is cross-governmental, it's deeper, it's horizontal and vertical, and it needs all stakeholders, both inside and outside government, to succeed and to step up and take ownership of it. So really important in Irish context that this is done.
Wonderful. Thanks, everyone. Indeed. So in a context of a rapidly evolving society and lots of different factors at play here, important that the whole of government is involved in these, because it does indeed touch on many aspects of a country. Natalia, I wonder if we can go a little bit more deeply into the case of Bulgaria now. I know that Bulgaria collaborated with the OECD to identify specific priorities and policy directions for the strategy, and you also worked with the OECD and the European Commission to develop an implementation plan. So you must have had a clear objective in mind when developing a strategy, and I'm sure you considered how to advance those objectives through such an implementation plan. So talk us through the process that you followed and how it shaped your strategy.
So first of all, one of the biggest benefits of having a skill strategy at the national level is that it is based on evidence, and that speaks like nothing else. It immediately wins the credibility in front of a variety of stakeholders. And having the buy-in from various stakeholders is critically important. And in no particular order, the businesses, the academia, the nonprofit sector, the expert sector, those are important push factors for reform, push actors for reform. So once you have them on board, things become different. It's not just a government effort, it's an ecosystem effort. And it was another great merit of our process that OECD led in the skill strategy formation, was that the skill strategy was immediately followed by an implementation plan. For policymakers and stakeholders alike, it basically says that there's meat to the strategy. It's not just a document that's going to sit on somebody's desk and never see real life, the light of life. But there's a plan as to how you go about it. So there's not just the what, but the how, the when, and what resources we would deploy to reach our goal. So I can really say that Bulgaria had a vision here, but it was critically important to have this external expertise with the OECD, supported by the European Commission, to be able to take us through a structured process to where this vision had very specific outcomes. And for a fragmented sort of approach that we had at the beginning, which I mentioned earlier, this is a fantastic outcome, which can now lead into what I would say streamlining of all efforts and all financial vehicles to produce real added value into the economy going forward.
Thanks very much. So relying on data and bringing diverse stakeholders together to, as you say, put meat on the strategy, on substance, really gives it the weight that it needs to move forward. Wonderful. Ilze, I know one of the other lessons was finding the right window of opportunity to launch a strategy. And so I understand that Latvia took efforts to align the development of your strategy with the EU programming period. How did this alignment unfold, and how did it shape your strategy?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I would say that we had two windows of opportunities. One was really that we aligned the development of national skills strategy with our national strategic planning framework. So we focused all attention and all effort on building one strong skill strategy. And as I mentioned, this sectoral strategy is the only strategy that is approved at the both parliamentary level and also cabinet of ministers level. So we use this opportunity to focus and to draw also our stakeholders' attention to joint efforts on skills by using this our national framework on how we are planning goals. And in this regard, a very important funding source for all the activities that are included in skills strategy is, of course, EU structural funds. And in order to program this funding, we also need to have discussions. So all these discussions that we had almost for a period of 2 years, so it was very, very long consultation period, we devoted both by discussing what do we need to do and also how we will fund those activities. So these were both basically combined, the development of skills strategy, national strategic planning process, and the EU funding programming. And apart from state budget, EU funding is very, very important resource for innovations and development related activities. And therefore, we were happy that in our discussions, we really managed to balance both the ambition to really talk about where do we want to invest and what are those innovative and development related things, and how to be also realistic, taking into account our starting point and the context. And as regards, for example, adult learning, we discussed and we set as part of our skills strategy, for example, two key initiatives that are funded by the EU. One is Training Funds Initiative, where we are involving employers as active partners in employee skills development, and also individual learning accounts. So the first seeds of these two important initiatives that we are working on right now were really made and discussed as part of the consultation process of skills strategy development.
Thanks so much. Yeah, I imagine that need to balance pragmatism with innovation is something that a lot of countries are facing. So thank you for that. Emma, if I can turn to you now, Ireland launched its national skills strategy in 2025. 2016, 2022, collaborated with the OECD to review this strategy in light of your country's current and emerging policy priorities. So this suggests that Ireland places considerable importance on evidence-based assessment, and I know evidence is something that Natalia and others have touched on. Can you elaborate further about how you brought evidence into your own work?
Absolutely, and you're quite correct. It is something that we take very seriously as a country. I suppose, where we're coming from on that is that a skills strategy needs to work for the people who we see as the beneficiary cohorts. So therefore, it's not a static document. It's not something that you just publish and forget about. You need to evolve, because clearly the world we live in and the world we work in is evolving all the time. So therefore, our strategy needs to evolve as well. And just coincidentally with the timing of the review that we did with the OECD, our ministry was established. So we had sat part of us within the Ministry for Education and part of us within the Ministry for Enterprise. Those two streams were brought together in our ministry about 4 years ago. So we wanted to make sure that the ministry was working appropriately, and partnered with the OECD to make sure that our strategies were working appropriately. And that's both, I suppose, quantitative and qualitative in terms of outputs and outcomes. We take partnership really, really seriously in Ireland. It's a real plank of our skills ecosystem that we work closely with enterprise and with the social partners to ensure that what we're doing works for the recipients of our policy as such. We have a range of platforms in place, and I would point, I suppose, just even to the name of my unit that I lead. So skills policy and enterprise engagement, the two go hand in hand. One can't be done without the other. They're not in isolation from each other, and so that's why we have the partnership platforms. Some of those platforms would include things like our National Skills Council, which we just recently reformed, trying to make sure that we really capture the voice of enterprise in policy making. We also have a regional structure which sort of mirrors that, bringing education and enterprise together. And those regional skills forums would align very much with the Pact for Skills idea from the EU. So bringing together those bodies to work on particular skills issues for particular industries in particular areas. We also have, of course, the SkillNet network, which is very enterprise-led in terms of design. And then there's a range of less formal sort of interventions with partners to take that sort of quality assurance approach. But in addition to that, then, there's the sort of more formalised evidence-based quantitative outputs piece that we do. We've recently established an evidence for policy unit within the department, and that builds on cohering a lot of the sort of evaluation work, value for money work, graduate outcomes surveys and so on that our agencies would do, and sort of try and bring that together. We also then have a project ongoing at the moment, which is taking really a very detailed and granular look at program by program outputs and outcomes more importantly, and putting in place a framework for that. So not just, how many graduates there are or what the expenditure is on a particular program, but actually the impact of the program, and how it helps people's life chances, and also how it affects enterprise. And that's just within our own ministry. There's a lot of that evidence that's collated from our partners across the board. And part of the sort of whole of government approach that we take is in that evaluation and sort of learning and leveraging what our partners are doing across government as well. So as both Natalia and Ilse said, it's about getting the stakeholders really involved, really ensuring that what we're doing is working, really bringing in place a governance structure that allows us to do that. And something, as I say, that we take quite seriously as a country. And, I think we do quite well, but we always want to do better on. So really that's a priority for our area to just embed that and continue to embed it throughout the cycle of the strategy.
Thanks so much. Indeed, as you say, the effectiveness of your governance and your ability to mobilize your network really is, I think, critical for the medium and long-term success of something that, as you say, is a living document. So very important to stress those. Natalia, if I can come back to you, I want to build on something that you said before. You talked about the importance of engaging stakeholders. Can you go a little bit more deeply into how you consulted stakeholders and what kind of challenges you might have faced? Because I know they're often highly heterogeneous groups. So how did you go about this?
We have a track record of consulting with stakeholders when doing a policy reform. But to be honest, this time we took it to another level, thanks to the OECD. The amount of consultation with a variety of forms, focus groups, public consultations, brainstorming sessions, sectoral input. In fact, I participated in one of those formats in a different role a couple of years ago. So I remember that from firsthand experience. It was a very thorough process. And it's important to do that because if you involve the stakeholders early on, it becomes their process and becomes their product. So it's their skill strategy. It's not the government's skill strategy. And that is critical to the success of the initiative. There were challenges along the way. Some were more trivial, such as linguistic challenges. Some of the stakeholders needed interpretation, or some were regionally based, and that is an important perspective to bring in. And others were more strategic. For example, when you have, as I mentioned, we have 4 ministries that own different parts of the skills agenda, and the Ministry of Education was a leading ministry in this process. You don't want them to disengage just because one of the ministry is leading the process, and maintaining champions within those institutions in a situation where we changed governments sometimes a couple of times a year throughout the process. That's a real test to leadership, I would think. The more interesting, I would say, strategic challenges in the process were the fact that, for example, we had an ongoing VET reform, vocational education and training reform, and it had to fit with our skill strategy as a bigger vision. And the other thing is the AI, not occurred, but sort of sprung up on top of the agenda exactly through this timeline during this process. So it is already changing the way we think about jobs, about skill sets, even about basic literacy. So from what was said earlier about the skill strategy being a living document, there's a need for that for sure, because times are changing as we're speaking, and we need to take into account new types of skills demands, including AI, that are affecting how we think about skills.
Absolutely, thanks. Yes, I mean, the pace of change is so fast these days, especially with AI, that it must be a constant process to keep things up to date and to keep on top of things. Emma, going back to you now, aligning the strategy with other key government strategies is also key. Can you tell us what other strategies you had in mind when developing your skills strategy and what steps you took to ensure alignment with broader policies?
Again, this goes back to the same question we're talking about all the time around the cross-governmental piece and the need to include all our stakeholders. So some of the things that we would have taken into account are things like the white paper on enterprise, which our colleagues in the Ministry for Enterprise developed. And that's really focused on the supports that are offered to our small and medium enterprises, for example. both financial supports, financial supports in terms of tax breaks and interventions like that, but also interventions like skills and so on, and trying to embed, I suppose, a sort of a narrative around the importance of skills for these types of companies, and the importance for their sort of productivity and their ability to thrive, their ability to survive, and trying to embed that message is really important. So we wanted to align our skills strategy to some of the findings in that white paper around the target cohorts there. Other things included work that is done on the sort of the pipeline of talent through our colleagues in the Department of Education. So we have, for example, a framework on lifelong guidance, and that's around career guidance for, from the school system into the workplace. And again, our skills strategy and our skills policy would have to reflect and be mindful of what's happening in that space that we don't necessarily control, but that feeds into the tertiary system. Other things would include the regional enterprise action plans, for example. So what we really want to do is make sure that in developing enterprise at sort of local and regional level, that skills are again a big factor there, and to ensure that our regional structures align very well with the structures that are driving those pieces out, that there's no duplication or overlap, but that there's a clear definition of role and a clear support of roles. Other things might include things like the work that we do within our ministry on adult literacy, for example. We have a policy in place there, very important to align that piece, very important to align our policy pieces around some of the reform programme that we're doing at the moment in Ireland. So we had a huge legislative programme in relation to our higher education system, and obviously the skills strategy has to align with that, but also that has to align with our skills goals. So a piece of management around that. Some of the other examples would be just picking up on the piece that Natalia mentioned about AI. So we have a national digital strategy. It has 4 pillars, and skills are one of the key pillars there. So, there is definitely a focus, and more of an appetite for skills to be seen as a central plank in dealing with these issues. And that, I think, is really largely through the work that we have done on embedding our skills strategy and embedding that sort of cross-governmental piece of work on that. So it's not just us that thinks of other people's strategies, but other people, when they're developing their strategies, also think of us and our skills strategy. So it's quite nice that there's a sort of a circular completion on that across government.
Thanks very much, Emma. Ilse, I want to go back to you. Can you talk a little bit about how Latvia is monitoring and evaluating your strategy and why you think this matters?
Yeah, thank you. So our strategy is a 7-year plan, so from 2021 to 2027. And apart from strategy being a 7-year, I would say, conceptual level document, we also have so-called action plans for every 2 or 3 years. And these action plans are again developed in partnership with stakeholders and other ministries. And they are, let's say, next level document from this conceptual level document, where we are really breaking down our aims and directions for development in like really smaller activities and activity level KPIs. And in order to develop a new action plan, we are, of course, evaluating the implementation of the previous action plan. And also in the development of the next plan, we are sort of revising what should be the next focuses for the next action plan, what are at current context, like, for example, COVID crisis or AI, are the crucial new contexts that we are either experiencing in the past or experiencing now. But at the same time, of course, we are looking at our general framework provided by the skills strategy. And I have to say that because we just had our new action plan discussion, we realized that our skills strategy is future-proof, because the things that are written there a couple of years ago, so in 2020, 21, they are still very, very relevant, and they are still ambitious, so that we feel energized and motivated to implement them. Yeah, but very important monitoring tool are these action plans and the discussions around them, their approval, setting their KPIs and assessing the KPIs of the previous action plans. Of course, apart from them, the next level is institutional yearly plans. and then other stakeholders plans that they have for their performance. So these are the ways how we are checking in. And also what is important to mention, also these action plans, again, they are approved both at the respective committee at the parliament and also the cabinet of ministers. And this again gives the weight for discussions. So we are taking it seriously and we are really following through how we are doing. But another important indicator for me of how I see that the skills strategy is still relevant is that when I hear either in media or in meetings when our stakeholders, they themselves, not us, the ministry people, they say, let's look what our skills strategies say. Let's look what is written there, whether we are still on the right track, what we have been what we have collectively set for our development. That for me is a very, very relevant reference point that the strategy is really, as it was mentioned before, our joint document, and it is still living and also future-proof document. But as regards to your question on how important is monitoring, I think it is very important. And here in Latvia, we sometimes are saying that we are very good with planning, but our challenge is the implementation and the deliverology. So this is definitely area that we also need to strengthen in the future, the implementation part.
Thanks so much, and thanks very much for bringing in the aspect of checking in with your stakeholders to have checks along the way, and I think that can be an important element to your monitoring of your strategy. So I want to pick up on something that Natalia said earlier. She mentioned creating champions in government was an important aspect of the work that you did in Bulgaria. So I actually wanted to check with Emma or Ilze whether you had actually built up any champions in your own government to implement your strategy, and did that play a key role as well?
So I suppose I might take this if that's all right, Ilse. The fact that our ministry was so newly established was quite an important piece in terms of the sort of the midpoint check-in on our strategy. And our former minister, Minister Harris, was really very vocal and a great advocate for skills and for that piece of the work and for the sort of the new mandate for our department, you know, and its new establishment. And indeed our current minister has built upon that. But I would also say that it's not just within the political system. I mean, we have some really good advocates outside of the political system. And we had recently, as I mentioned, reformed our National Skills Council. That's enterprise-led, and the chairman of the council is a fantastic advocate. I mean, the council has only been in establishment since June of this year, and he's very passionate, very committed to the agenda, goes and talks to everybody he can talk to, you know, and really is a really great advocate. And I think as well as the government piece, that's quite important because as both speakers mentioned, you know, governments can change and politicians can come and go, but the agenda is a long-term agenda for the country, and so it needs to be kept sort of to the front and centre, irrespective in a way of political priorities.
Thanks so much, Emma. I think that's all the questions I have on my list, so I just want to extend a very hearty thanks to all of our panelists. I know I learned a lot, and best of luck for the implementation of your respective strategies. To everyone who's joined the panel discussion today, please make sure that you check out the report on our website. It's available at oecd.org. And once again, thanks to everyone, and thanks to everyone who's joined us today.